The marble in the lobby of Vanguard and Roth had always reminded me of a mausoleum, cold, white, and polished to a mirror finish. I had spent 26 years walking across those floors, my heels clicking with the rhythmic confidence of a woman who knew exactly where she stood in the world. But today, the sound was different. Today, I wasn't walking. I was hovering, caught in that strange, breathless vacuum that exists between a life lived and a life lost. I was 52 years old, and I was holding a cardboard box. The weight of it was deceptive. It wasn't just the physical gravity of the contents, the framed photo of my daughter, Maya, crossing the stage at Yale, the heavy gold Mont Blanc my mother had bought me with her first Social Security check, the small glass paperweight I'd picked up in Tokyo after closing the Mitsubishi merger. It was the weight of the invisible things. The late nights, the missed birthdays, the thousands of hours I'd poured into the firm's foundation, all of it now condensed into a singular, undignified exit. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, a byproduct of decades spent staring down market volatility and aggressive boardrooms. But my skin felt thin, as if the very atmosphere of the lobby was acidic. I had been the senior managing director of risk. I had survived the 08 collapse, the 11 European debt crisis, and the flash crashes of the late teens. I was the person people called when the math stopped making sense. The silence in the lobby was surgical. The security guard, a man named Arthur who I'd sent Christmas cards to for a decade and whose son's college application essay I had proofread, wouldn't meet my eye. He stood by the glass turnstiles, his posture stiff, performing the protocol that dictated I was now a stranger, or worse, a liability. "I can take that to the curb for you, Ms. Mercer," Arthur whispered, his voice thick with a pity that burned worse than the firing itself. "I've got it, Arthur," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "I've been carrying this place for 20 years. I can carry a box for 20 feet. The humiliation was a physical heat, a localized sun burning right in the center of my chest. Just 3 minutes ago, I had been a titan. Now, I was a woman in her 50s standing in a lobby, wondering if the health insurance for my mother's memory care facility would lapse before I could find a new seat. The morning had begun like any other Tuesday in the meat grinder, the nickname we'd given the 41st floor back when we were all young and hungry. At 5:30 a.m., I was on the Peloton in my Brooklyn brownstone, watching the Nikkei 225 close. By 7:15 a.m., I was at my desk, deep diving into the Sterling Global account. Elias Sterling was our North Star client, a man who controlled $2 billion in liquid assets and possessed a temper that could freeze a trading floor. But he trusted me. He trusted me because I never gave him the Wall Street polish. If a trade was risky, I told him it was a gamble. If a fund was bleeding, I showed him the bandage. But for weeks, the numbers coming out of the junior derivative desk, Barrett Thorne's playground, hadn't been adding up. There was a smear in the reporting, small incremental discrepancies of about 0.5% that suggested someone was hiding losses by shifting them into high-yield, high-risk offshore vehicles. I had been heading to the 40th floor boardroom to present these findings to the senior partners when it happened. I was carrying a double espresso in one hand and a thick, tabbed binder of audit trails in the other. I was 5 minutes late, a cardinal sin in a firm where time was literally currency. I rounded the corner of the executive corridor at a clip, my mind already rehearsing the opening line of my presentation. I didn't see him coming. Barrett Thorne, the 32-year-old son of our founding partner, stepped out of his office like he owned the air he breathed. He was on his phone, laughing at something, his expensive watch catching the light. We collided with the force of two different eras crashing into each other. The espresso didn't just spill. It performed a graceful dark arc, soaking into the pristine white fabric of Barrett's bespoke shirt. It was a $5,000 shirt, tailored in London, and now it looked like an ink blot test. Barrett jumped back, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Are you kidding me?" Sloane, are you out of your mind? I am so sorry, Barrett. I was rushing to get to the Sterling briefing, I said, reaching into my blazer pocket for a silk square. Let me. He slapped my hand away. The sound of skin on skin echoed down the hallway, sharp as a gunshot. A junior analyst nearby dropped a stapler. Don't touch me, he hissed. His eyes were darting around, checking to see who was watching. Look at this. This is silk. Do you have any idea what my schedule looks like today? I have the Sterling meeting in 10 minutes. I have the press coming at noon. Barrett, it's a shirt. I'll have my assistant run to Xenia and get a replacement. But more importantly, we have a meeting with Elias, and we need to discuss the offshore gaps I found in the Aegis ledger. No, he said, his voice rising, vibrating with a decade of suppressed resentment. We aren't discussing anything. You think you're my peer? You think because my father lets you sit in on the board meetings that you're part of the family? You're a glorified accountant, Sloane. A bean counter who has aged out of her usefulness. The aged out comment hit me like a physical blow. I had been at this firm since before he could drive. I'm the head of risk, Barrett. My job is to protect the firm, even from its own partners. Those Aegis numbers are inflated. If Elias sees them. You don't discuss anything with me, he barked, his face turning a mottled purple. You've been undermining me for months. You think I don't know you've been double-checking my trades? You think I don't see the way you look at me in the briefings? Like I'm some child playing with his father's toys? You are playing with toys, Barrett. But the toys are other people's pensions. You're over-leveraged by $400 million. That was the end. He stepped so close I could smell the expensive mint and the arrogance on his breath. You're fired. Effective immediately. Gross negligence. Destruction of property. Insubordination. Pick a reason, Sloane. I'll make sure HR has it in writing before you hit the elevator. You can't fire me, Barrett. My father is in Tuscany with his third wife. I'm the acting managing partner. Security! He roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. Get this woman out of my sight. The walk back to my office was the longest 60 yards of my life. I saw Marcus, the junior analyst I'd mentored for 3 years, the one who called me for advice when his daughter had the flu, look down at his keyboard as I passed. I saw Janine, my assistant, burst into tears as a security guard stood over her desk like a sentry. In finance, when you're fired, you aren't a person anymore. You're a virus that needs to be quarantined. I had seen it happen a dozen times, usually to people who were actually incompetent or dangerous. To be on the receiving end was to feel the oxygen leave the room. I packed my life into that box in under 4 minutes. I didn't take the professional development books. I didn't take the spare blazer. I took the things that reminded me I was a mother, a daughter, and a professional. As I walked out, Barrett was still standing in the middle of the floor, barking orders to the dry cleaners on his cell phone, acting as if he'd just pruned a dead branch from a tree. I realized then that Barrett wasn't just angry about the shirt. He had been terrified of what was in my binder. The Aegis ledger wasn't just an error. It was a deliberate manipulation of valuation metrics. By firing me and banning me from the server, he had bought himself exactly 48 hours to move the money before the audit went live. He thought he had won. He thought a 52-year-old woman would slink home to Brooklyn and spend the weekend crying into a glass of Chardonnay. I stood in the lobby, the box becoming heavier with every passing second. I was mourning the loss of a future I'd assumed was guaranteed. I was 52. The Old Boys Club didn't hire women my age as fresh talent. I was too expensive, too experienced, and now, apparently, too clumsy. The elevator chimed. Elias Sterling stepped out. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like a shadow cast across the marble. He was heading for the security desk when he saw me. He stopped dead. His eyes went from my face to the box, then back to my face. Sloane, he asked, his voice low and resonant. The meeting is upstairs. Why are you standing here with your life in your arms? I didn't try to hide it. I've been let go, Elias. There was an incident with some coffee and a few years of built-up ego. Elias didn't move. He didn't offer a platitude. He just stared at me with those predatory, intelligent eyes. Barrett? Barrett, I confirmed. Elias looked up at the ceiling, as if he could see through the floors to where Barrett was likely currently congratulating himself. Then, he did something I'd never seen him do. He laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound of a man who had just seen a competitor walk off a cliff. He thinks he's a genius, Sloane, Elias said, putting his phone away. He's been trying to move my capital into a shell fund called Aegis North for 3 weeks. He told me you were the one pushing for the move. He told me you said it was the only way to protect my margins. My blood turned to ice. I never said that. Aegis North is a junk-rated vehicle. I specifically flagged that as a do not buy. I have the audit trail in this box. Elias nodded slowly. I know. That's why I'm here. I didn't come for the meeting. I came to see if you would sign the transfer order. If you weren't there to sign it, well, I had my answer. Elias led me to a small, quiet cafe across from the New York Stock Exchange. The box sat on the velvet seat beside me like a silent guest. 26 years, I said, staring into my coffee. I started here when the tickers were still loud. I worked through the 90s boom, the dot-com bust, the housing crisis. I remember when this firm was about relationships, not just algorithms. Relationships are built on trust, Sloane, Elias said, and Barrett Thorne wouldn't know trust if it hit him in his bespoke face. He's been cooking the proprietary trading books. He's using my capital, the capital you managed, as a float to cover his losses in the Asian markets. He's not just arrogant, he's desperate. He's been hiding $400 million in losses behind a series of complex swap agreements. I leaned back, the adrenaline of the morning finally fading into a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't just a victim of a bad temper. I was a witness who had been silenced. Barrett hadn't fired me because of a stain on his shirt. He had fired me because the Sterling audit was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I was the only person with the keys to the digital vault who wouldn't take a bribe. If he moves your money today without my signature, I whispered, he's committing wire fraud. He's already done it, Elias said, sliding his phone across the table. A notification from his bank showed a pending transfer. He forged your digital override 10 minutes ago. He must have had one of the IT kids bypass your terminal the second you walked out the door. I felt a surge of nausea. He's going to sink the firm. No, Elias said. He's going to sink himself. I've already contacted the SEC, and I've already called a few friends. But that's not why we're here. Elias leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. You've spent your life protecting their name. Why? They don't deserve the armor you give them. You're 52, Sloane. You have more market intelligence in your little finger than Barrett Thorne has in his entire lineage. I'm pulling the $2 billion, and I want you to manage it. Elias, I just lost my job. I'm radioactive. You're only radioactive to the people who are afraid of the truth, he countered. I'm starting a new venture, Sloane Mercer Partners. I provide the capital, the reputation, and the door opening. You provide the soul. You provide the risk management that actually works. We'll take the Sterling account, and I suspect, once the word gets out about why you left, we'll take half of Vanguard's client list with us. I didn't answer immediately. I went home. I sat in my brownstone in Brooklyn and looked at the box. I took out the gold pen and held it. I thought about the thousands of women who had been pushed out of the industry once they hit 50, told they were too slow, too cautious, too old. I thought about Maya, who was watching me with concerned eyes from the kitchen doorway. What happened, Mom? She asked. I had a collision, I said. And I think I'm finally going to win the insurance claim. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in financial demolition. By Wednesday morning, the news hit the Bloomberg terminal. Elias Sterling withdraws $2 billion from Vanguard and Roth, citing governance concerns. The stock price didn't just dip, it cratered. On the trading floor, the meat grinder became a slaughterhouse. Investors who had stayed with Vanguard and Roth purely because of my reputation for risk management started calling their brokers. I sat in my kitchen, my phone vibrating so hard it nearly walked off the table. "Sloane, it's Gideon from the Sovereign Fund. If you aren't at Vanguard to watch the gates, I don't want my money in that yard. Where do I sign?" By Thursday, the board of Vanguard and Roth held an emergency session. Barrett's father was flown back from Tuscany, his face pale and haggard. They discovered the Aegis North logs. They discovered the $400 million hole that Barrett had tried to plug with a stolen bridge from Elias Sterling. At 2 p.m. on Friday, I received a text from Arthur, the security guard. "He's out, Ms. Mercer. They didn't even give him a box. They just took his badge and escorted him through the service entrance so the press wouldn't see him. The SEC is upstairs now. It's over." 6 months later, I stood in a new office. The floors weren't marble. They were reclaimed oak, warm, resilient, and grounded. My name was on the glass. Sterling Mercer Partners. I had hired Janine as my chief of staff. I had hired Marcus and the other juniors who had been brave enough to reach out after the collapse. We weren't the biggest firm on the street, but we were the cleanest. Maya was sitting in the guest chair, reading through a prospectus. "You look different, Mom," she said. "Different how?" "You don't look like you're waiting for the floor to drop out from under you anymore. You look like you are the floor." I smiled. I picked up the gold pen, the one my mother had given me, and signed the final papers for our first $1 billion close. I thought back to that moment in the lobby, the weight of the cardboard box, and the stinging humiliation of Barrett's voice. He had thought he was taking everything from me. He had thought that by stripping away my title, he was stripping away my worth. But he had forgotten the most basic rule of the market. Value is intrinsic. You can't liquidate integrity, and you can't fire experience. I looked at the coffee mug on my desk. It was a simple ceramic cup, a gift from the team. I took a sip, leaned back in my chair, and watched the sun rise over a city that finally felt like mine. I hadn't just survived the crash. I had cleared the wreckage to build something that would actually last. And for the first time in 26 years, I didn't mind if a little coffee spilled. I knew exactly how to clean up the mess.